This whole series that we're in, this Christmas and Flannel, is actually a kind of a tradition of our church. A few years ago, we had the idea of kind of doing a unique but also kind of fun Christmas celebration. So we came up with the idea of a Christmas and Flannel where we encourage people to wear flannel clothes on Sunday. And hopefully we'll actually have a Sunday morning that's cool enough to wear flannel, right? Like if we would have wore it this morning, we would have been drenched in sweat. It would have been so uncomfortable. But hopefully next weekend and the next couple of Sundays, we actually have some Sundays that are cool enough to enjoy some flannel. So we already see some people in flannel, but we just love to have fun and enjoy that together and take pictures out on the picture wall and all of that stuff. But we're in this series starting this morning, and I encourage you, as always, take notes. I encourage you, if you don't yet have it, take advantage of the church app or grab one of our free journals that we have out in the lobby. But this morning is different as we get to lean into just the things that Jesus brought into the world. We have wonderful songs that we sing. These songs that kind of bring this nostalgia back of reminding ourselves when we were kids singing them, or if we ever went out caroling, right? Or if we watch Hallmark movies or movies where other people are caroling, right? Because I don't know if I would go do that, but I could watch other people. Sure, that'd be great. But we have these songs that we sing, and we hear about what Jesus is bringing as he comes into the world as a baby. In this series, we're leaning into the reality of that he brought so many things for us. And so I want us together this morning as we lean into today. In this series, we're going to talk about how he brings love and hope and joy and redemption and all of those things which are beautiful and real and true. But this morning, I want us to lean into a part of what Christ brought into the world that often isn't highlighted too much or even included in songs that we sing, a part of our memories that we have of Christmas. You see, each of the Gospels begin in a unique way. Matthew begins with Joseph hearing from an angel about how his bride-to-be is bringing in the Savior of the world. We hear the name Emmanuel given, that means God with us, there in Matthew chapter 1, which is beautiful. We read about the Magi in Matthew chapter 2. Mark's gospel is different. We don't read the birth story, but we read about how he came into the world and how he is the good news of the world. And in Luke's gospel, we read how he comes in, and it's from Mary's perspective of that whole time and the shepherds and everything that's happening. It's beautiful. And we'll read the stories and we'll talk about it together in the weeks to come. But this morning, I want us to lean into John's gospel, because John's gospel also starts a little bit different. It doesn't begin with the sweet story of how a baby is born, but instead it begins with the Word coming into the world. And I want us to read it together in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 8. I encourage you, if you have your Bible, open it to John chapter 1. John is the fourth book of the New Testament, so kind of flip back to the two-thirds part of the last part of your Bible, and John is there after Matthew, Mark, Luke, and then John. And if you're in Acts, you've gone too far, but I want us to read it together, friends. So in John chapter 1, verse 1 through 8, it says this. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John." That's John the Baptist. "He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light." And you see, it's fascinating as we spend time in Scripture how Genesis begins with the creation of the world, how God spoke all of the universe into existence. And every piece throughout those 6 days of creation, he spoke the universe into existence. But what's fascinating is we read the Old Testament, we spend time in the Word, we see how God really only makes himself aware to the world in one of two ways. Through the beauty of nature around us and seeing how complex and creative and unique, but also organized and in order it is, and and giving our awareness to a creator, but God makes himself aware to humanity through speaking to them. When he speaks to Noah and Abraham, when he speaks to Joseph and so many others in the Old Testament, he speaks and he speaks, and there are moments where he kind of uses elements as a symbolic sense of his presence, where he kind of forms in a pillar of smoke, or well known in the story of Exodus when Moses sees him in a burning bush. But these moments where God uses even things of the world to help people even get a sense that something different is happening, but yet not even seeing really the Lord. And in John's gospel, he begins in this unique way where now God is stepping into the world, where for all of time he'd been shouting from the other end of the house, but now he's walked into the room. And now the Word is here in the flesh, and now it says that in him was the life, and that this life was the light of all mankind. That the Word came. This is so beautiful that the Word came bearing life and bringing his light into a very dark world. That the Word came. Oh my goodness, the Word of God. This beautiful illustration of what we see in John's gospel, how he uses this capital W word to sense that now it is the best way of God communicating to humanity who he is. That now it's not just words that they would hear, but now it's one that they can touch and be with. It's beautiful. And you see, a man named John was used by God to begin to get people ready. He would be sent ahead of them to prepare them that the one who God has been promising is coming. And all people had known darkness. It's all they had known. They were in a world where people were so blind and so lost in what was happening. They were in a world that was so dark, and it was normal. It was the way that they thought that God had disappeared in some sense. That God was quiet and he was distant, that he was gone. And oh my goodness, because they hadn't had a prophet in a while. They hadn't had someone come and speak. There's a 400-year gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament. People were wondering, man, I wonder if God turned around and walked away. But then God doesn't show up in a storm or something. He doesn't show up through some loud, glamorous type thing of gathering the world's attention. No, he comes as a baby. And the world was so dark. And the world was lost and wondering. I mean, have you ever been in such a dark moment wondering, oh my goodness, how can I even make my way out of this? For part of our childhood, my brothers and I, we in our family, we grew up out in the country. And for a lot of it, we grew up more in town in the city. But for a chunk of it, we were out in the country. And we loved to explore. We didn't grow up with Xboxes or PlayStations. Instead, we had each other, and we had sticks to hit each other with. Like, that was our fun. And we loved to explore. And we lived out in the middle of nowhere, and we had all this land. And so one day, my brothers and I, we decided to go to a part of the property and to keep walking further than we've ever walked before. And so we get our stuff and grab some bottles of water and those things, and one of my brothers even smart enough to bring this little like Swiss Army little compass thing, little keychain that you hook in your pocket or hook on your belt, and so we head off into the woods, and we begin just to walk and walk and walk, and we begin now to cross over creeks and maybe jump over a few fences, or maybe they're open, right? We begin to kind of walk further than we ever had before. And it was like all of a sudden that we blinked, and the sun was gone. Have you ever been out in the country or somewhere, and all of a sudden it's like, you know, the sun is going down, but it's like all of a sudden you blink, and in one moment it's just so much darker. Before we knew it, the sun was gone. There was the three of us, young kids, out in the woods. And oh my goodness, we could not see anything. There were no stars. It was a cloudy night. It was quiet. We could only hear the leaves under our own feet. And that was probably one of the most lost moments of my childhood as we'd explore the woods. And being in darkness, all the trees look the same. If perhaps you grew up in the country and you look out your back porch, you kind of get that sense of everything just kind of looks like a big wall of darkness. My older brother, he pulls out his little Swiss Army thing, and it's glow in the dark, and you can see, we're just huddled around just staring at this thing. And even as we would look at the compass, we wouldn't even know which direction to go in. I mean, yeah, sure, we knew which direction was north and east, south, and west, but man, we had no idea which way was home. So we just began to walk and yell, and hopefully someone would hear us. Maybe we'd see a house, and we began to walk and walk and walk, and time had gone by. And then there was a beam of hope. As one of my dad's friends, they had kind of went out into the woods with big old flashlights, and we could see them off in the distance. And man, light had never looked so good. It had also never been so easy to find once you could see it. Because when all that's what you know is darkness, when you see that ray of hope, it is bright, is it not? It is not a little flashlight light, little cell phone light. It is big beam radiating at you. Christ as a baby comes into the world, and the world was dark, and his presence brought light, a light that humanity so desperately needed. And you see, the purpose of light is to reveal what is cloaked in darkness. And you see, what is so significant about John's gospel when he's writing this is that the darkness of sin was a dense shadow over every man and woman's heart. And even with the law of the Old Testament in their hands, they still could not find their way in life. Understand that. Even though they had the Ten Commandments and they knew God's direction of right and wrong, they knew all of this, they still could not find their way in this world. And see, Christ comes in, and what does he begin to bring to humanity? What does the light begin to shine so brightly for? Well, friends, in the next few verses of John's gospel, he writes that the light of the world came to bring us truth and grace. In verse 9 through 14, it says that the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. And he came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Wow. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, in the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, and listen, full of grace and truth. Friends, the purpose of light is to reveal and understand that when Christ is the light of the world, he comes into the world, he's revealing to humanity what they had been lacking. It is truth and grace. And I want us to lean into this reality that we cannot miss it. We cannot miss this part of the beautiful story of celebrating Jesus' birth. Because we see the porcelain nativity scenes, and we see the front yard blow-ups of the nativity scenes, and the beautiful wood cutouts even with the light beaming on it in our front yards. We see these things all around us, and we cannot miss that it is the revival, the arrival of truth and grace into the world. Understand, friends, that Christmas, what John is trying to get us to understand, Christmas is about the light of the world coming and illuminating for us God's truth and grace, so that way we may know the one who made us and finally become who he has always meant for us to be. My goodness, the humanity, the people of the world had the compass, but man, we were so blinded in how we could use it. humanity continued to fall and lean away from God, even though we knew. Well, because there was a darkness within our soul. There was this rebelliousness in our soul that God had to come and lead us and illuminate for us and show us that, oh my goodness, now we don't have to wander throughout this life and guess our way around, but now we can have this light that leads us forward. And friends, my encouragement to us, oh my goodness, that we would begin to allow the light of Christ to lead us into all truth and know His grace. We begin to let His light lead us into all truth. Understand, friends, this is one of the beautiful parts of the story. We always have big words of love and hope and peace and joy, and these are the words that we hang up in our house. These are the words that we put out on our front lawns. These are the words that create these feelings inside of us that make us celebrate and feel gratitude in the holiday season. But understand, we cannot ignore that when we sing songs about the light coming, it is so that we would have His light lead us into His truth. He came into the world, but man, even those that He came as a little baby to be around, they didn't even know Him. They didn't even recognize Him. It's beautiful. I mean, we'll read it in a few weeks, but it's beautiful how Matthew chapter 2, how God leads people from other nations. Other nations. The Magi from the east, people from other nations to come and worship Jesus, that even people around Him couldn't even see who He was. The world at that time was so lost in their traditions and their way of assuming the world. And I love in John chapter 8, 9, and 10, there's this moment where Jesus is kind of confronting some of the religious leaders, and they kind of come up to Jesus and they say, they're trying to trap Him. They try to trap Him in disobeying the law of the Old Testament. And He says, say that again, come back again. He's like, yeah, Jesus, you're breaking God's commandments. And He's like, hold up. He's like, are you sure? And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. He didn't quite talk like this, but He says, are you sure? Because He's like, what I believe is happening is that I'm breaking your law, but not the one that God has given us. And the people of that time had become so entrapped in their own ideas and ways of life, and that this was right and how we should live, and they embrace this sense of legalism and how they would be good people and all this stuff, and they could never amount to it. And that was part of the point as well. And you see, even though that was a time back then, people have not changed. The world around us has changed, but understand the heart of man has not changed. And understand that we even today allow ourselves to drift into a place of darkness of only seeing our traditions and our preferences. We have our assumptions. We kind of guess our way along. We have our own ideas of what we are so convinced is right, and we even have our own sense of understanding what all of this teaches us. We have our own kind of ideas, right? And so we kind of listen through this, and we kind of just, kind of skim along, and we get our ideas of, okay, this is what it means to be a Christian, and we leave so much of it up into our own creation instead of God's. Man, we become a people who are self-reliant. We talked last week, I used the analogy of, man, how people nowadays, we trust Google searches more than the doctors. And so now we find ourselves going to urgent care, going to see a professional, and we, like, are you sure? Like, Google said this. Are you sure? Like, we lead with that. Like, Google said that I have this. And oh my goodness, I'm so great that I'm not a healthcare professional, but we are people who trust those things more than in the room with the person who knows what they're talking about. But even beyond that, we are people who are very, very stuck into a sense of not really being all that interested, to allowing God to lead us into a way, even if it means that the path that we are following, even if it's formed with good intentions, is one that is deeply wrong. Even as a pastor, sometimes there are times where I spend time in the Word of God, and I read something, and I have to scratch my head and say, okay, what did I just read? Man, especially when I spend time in the Old Testament, I'll read and I'll see things that happen and say, okay, wow, I really got to understand this, because, man, our questions come out for me, and I love spending time with people over coffee and talking through questions they have about the Bible and about our faith. And you see, in the Old Testament, there's this moment in 1 Chronicles chapter 13. This is such an important moment. In 1 Chronicles chapter 13, King David is over all of Israel. And underneath the previous leader, underneath Saul's kingship, the Ark of the Covenant, it was a sacred kind of thing that resembled God's presence with the people. Saul allowed it to be captured and taken over to their enemies. And when David becomes king, one of the first things he does, he says, we need to go get that back. So in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, he goes, he brings his army, they capture, they get it back. They get together with some chariots, and they put some oxen around it and with some poles, and they begin to transport this thing back home. And God had made it very clear that while the Ark of the Covenant was not him and should never be worshipped, they should treat it in such a way as if it was him. The reverence and fear they should have around it. They should never to touch it. And you see, in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, there's this moment where one of the ox that's carrying it, his leg begins to fall, and this great man named Uzzah goes and puts his hands on the ark, and as soon, because it's about to fall over, and he keeps it from falling over. As soon as they rebalance it, he dies. Because no one was supposed to touch it. And he is struck down. He had all good intentions. He had all good intentions of the world. And it says there that David was confused, he was angry, he was so lost. And even in chapter 14, the enemy comes, the Philistines come to attack them. And David is just like, God, are you even with us anymore? Are you even going to allow us to win this battle? And in chapter 14, there's these two moments where the enemies come, and he's like, God, are you really with us? And he says, yes, I'm with you. Let's fight this way. And then they come a second time, and then the Lord, when David seeks the Lord, he says, okay, now I want you to attack from this side. And okay, sure. But then now the light bulb begins to go off. Because David is still wrestling with what happened, where he saw one of his loyal friends with a good heart, with good intentions, be struck down by the Lord. He's still wrestling with these things, and it says in 1 Chronicles chapter 15, he says that he goes into and he gathers all of the Levites, which are the kind of the pastors of the altar. They're kind of the priests. They carry out all the priestly duties, and he gathers all the priests and he says, listen, we never asked God how he wanted us to carry it. He said, you were supposed to carry it, not the ox. But we never asked God. Now let that settle in, because that is a hard truth. People with good intentions can still do things that are against the will of God and understand that it will very much ruin their life. Because Uzzah had good intentions, but he did not ask the Lord, what should we do? David did not ask the God. He just assumed. Let's put it on this chariot. Let's carry it with some ox. Let's just do it this way. He never asked God, how do you want us to carry this? And this is an important part of our journey of faith. Understand, because this is what it means to wait on God. Because we spring ourselves into good intentions and what we think is right, and good opportunities come in front of us, and we think, oh, it's good, it must be God blessing us. But understand, good intentions will derail our journey of faith. Human wisdom and what we think are good ideas will ruin our life. Understand that we must be people who wait on God to lead us into his truth, and understand that our unwillingness to wait will ruin our lives. Understand that. Our unwillingness to allow God to speak to us about our job, about our person we want to marry, about the future of our life, about parenting, about all these things, about handling our money, about finding a great church to be a part of, all these things. If we do not allow God to really be the leader. You know, when you're walking through the night and you have a flashlight out in front of us and there's a spotlight where you're walking, sometimes as we're walking along, the flashlight, the person carrying the flashlight doesn't really go fast enough, so sometimes we get too far ahead and we wait for the person with the flashlight to catch up, and so we get in this moment where we feel like God is being too slow with the flashlight. And what happens is we think we know where the light is going, and so we step off into that direction, but we don't know that it's actually completely outside of where God is actually trying to lead us. Because our good intentions and our human wisdom, understand, come second to waiting on God. And this is what we must embrace. Because we are in this world where we want God to lead us. Because, oh my goodness, things with the family are insane, with the kids, with work, with all this stuff, with life and moving here and never having roots, with trying new things and getting new jobs and new relationships and new friends and all this stuff. My goodness. We are people who know that we need to be led. But we are unwilling to wait for God to lead and understand that in this day and time, if we are going to know the way of God in our life, we have now got to be people who are patient and willing to wait, who slow down and wait for God to speak, and we don't move until He does. We are a people who want God to lead us. We want to know His truth, but understand that our impatience, our ambition, our restlessness will derail us so fast. And friends, when we talk about knowing the truth, what Christ is trying to illuminate into our life, understand that we have got to learn how to slow down. So the creator of the universe can speak, to let Him know that we're willing to wait, that we're willing to be patient. Because more than doing this right now, I want to give time to God to let Him know that His leadership in my life means everything. And people who love the Lord with a history of following God, we allow our good intentions to lead us into foolishness so easily, friends, or to keep us there even. Friends, understand, this is not the first time that you've heard a pastor talk about looking to God to lead you. It's not the first time I've preached on this. I understand, I believe the world in our day and time right now, as an observer of culture, we have got to learn to wait on the Lord. And friends, I love how it says that Christ came to bring His truth and His grace, because that's one of the beautiful parts of His truth that He is trying to communicate to humanity, is that He loves us. That He loves us. And that's a truth that's even hard to receive, that we hear around us, but it's hard to receive. And we have got to, as allowing Christ to be this light in our life, we have got to allow Him and let Him shine His light and cover us with His grace. Cover us with His grace. People usually respond to God in one of two ways. We usually view ourselves as not being that bad, so we don't really need God. And understand, people, it's very true reality, is if we have no inkling of needing God in our life, then we don't really want Him in our life. And He gets the message. And understand that there's some truth that needs to punch our pride in the heart in some of that, and a lot of it, and all of it, really. But the second way we often approach the Lord is we view ourselves as very, very messed up, and we think that there's no way that I deserve God's help. And you know what? The second person there is right. But they're not done with the sentence, because they skip the next part where we have sinned, we don't deserve God, but yet for some reason he wants to help us anyway. And that for some reason is because of his great, wondrous love for us. There's a wonderful story that Jesus shares, and it's probably one of the most important stories of all the parables he tells. And he tells the parable of the lost son in Luke chapter 15. You see, we usually read that story, and we know it even some, but there's two sons involved there, and in some way both of them are very lost. Allow me to tell you the story. See, as Jesus is with all these people who are priests, these people who are religious Pharisees, these people who are so far and distant from God, in this kind of company of all of them, he shares this story of how this father of great wealth and prosperity and affluence in their community, he had two sons, and as they grew and matured into adulthood, one of the sons came to him and says, I want what's mine, and I wish that you were dead so I could have my inheritance. And well, the father gives him and gives him his money, he gives him his inheritance, all that stuff, and then that son, he goes out and he spoils all of it. He ruins, and he wastes it away, partying and doing all this stuff. He wastes it all away. And then he comes to a point where he's like, man, I don't really think that my father would bring me back as his son, but I wonder if my father would bring me back as his servant. Maybe my father would bring me back home as an employee. There's no way I'd have my room back in the main house, but maybe if I could just stay in the servant quarters, that would be enough. And so the one son comes home ready with his spiel, ready to apologize, ready to receive shame, ready to be embarrassed, ready to say, oh, Dad, please forgive me. I'm so sorry. He's walking down the driveway with all of these rehearsed things in his mind of apologizing, of asking for forgiveness, of just trying to get a little bit of help. And he is so surprised when his father, dressed in his fine business attire, runs out into the mud and runs out into the dirt and doesn't wait for his son to even speak. He hugs him right away. And before his son could even kind of begin to beg and plead for help, his father hushes him and he turns around and he says, all right, it's time for a party. We've got to celebrate. It's a beautiful illustration of the grace and love that God has for those who are wandering and who are drifting from God. But understand that there's grace for the other son because both sons are lost. The other son sees his brother comes home and he gets angry. And he comes to his father and he says, I've been loyal to you this whole time. I have sacrificed for you. I have worked my tail off for you, and you welcome this brother of mine home with open arms? The father says, you have missed it the whole time. He says, he is my son and you are my son, and all that I have is yours, not because of your loyalty, not because you have earned it and been good enough, but because you are my son. That's where the grace of God comes in. Understand that the grace is there for the one who has wandered. And understand that grace is one for who's trying to prove themselves, who's trying to be good enough for God. Understand that is the beauty of what Christ's light came to illuminate to the world. It's the reason why the religious leaders couldn't get it in their mind that this was God. Because he loved sinners, and he would sit with people who were tax collectors and prostitutes, and he would spend time with those that they were convinced were too far gone. And he would even spend time with those of great status and great education and great achievement, and when they had humbled hearts, he would bring them in close as well. Wow. Like Nicodemus, for example, and others. And Jairus and so many others with great achievement for God. But yet we're open to and needing his grace. Understand, friends, that as John shares right there in chapter 1, the Word came into the world bearing life, and the life was the light of the world. And it was in that light that we would be found, and that those who embraced it, who would step into the light, would now be called what? Children of God. Become a daughter. Become a son. Man, that is the goodness of this season that we celebrate. That we have a God who's came into the world with a giant flashlight, ready to lead us in what is true and what is right. But he also came in, and not looking to beat us down further. He came in as a baby, not intimidating, not scary looking. The King of the world came in as a child that could be held. And when you hold a baby, you don't hold it out here, you bring it close. Because God wanted people to know that he came to be close. That's why he came the way that he did. My goodness, friends, that is the joy of what we celebrate. And friends, will we not miss how God is looking to lead us? Would we be willing to wait? And right now, as we embrace the light of Christ and allow it to shine in our soul and shine on our life, my goodness, would we know that that light covers us, and we are not what we used to be, but we are covered in the grace of God, and we are now a daughter of the King, and we are now a son of the Most High. And that is who we are now. We allow the light of God shine that brightly in our soul and in our life. Would you stand with me as we pray and sing this last song?